Hi, welcome back to the Bockscar Boom Show. I'm Aiden, this is Sarah, and today we're going to be talking about Rosa Marie Burger and her time in Germany.
Yeah. So her mother was English and her father was German. So they originally, they lived for a couple of years in England, and then they moved to a small, Bavarian town in northern Germany, called, we looked this up earlier, Gockenstoffen? I can't read very well.
Spot on.
Yeah, thank you. And they lived a very traditional lifestyle. Everybody was really polite. They kind of, on Sundays, I think when they went to church, they wore really traditional dress. So in 1938, Rosa was 17 and began studying at a trade school in Louisburg, a town 25 miles away from her little village, and she got a job with the government of, I assume, Germany, doing clerical work in Oschenfurt, which is the county seat. Yeah, thank you. She worked for the school board, and in the afternoon she worked for a lawyer who comes in a lot in our story.
Wait, so she had 3 jobs. She
had 2 jobs.
She worked at the school, she worked for the government, and then she worked...
No, the government was the school work. So she worked for the government for the school board.
Yeah. Okay.
So the lawyer was the administrative head of the police for the entire county.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the town she lived in had numerous Jewish citizens, which they were tradesmen and farmers. And as the 1930s came along, Hitler came into power, and life began to get pretty tough for the Jews. The Jewish citizens and the town began to get afraid of what was happening in Germany and the changes that Hitler was bringing in. So it started with Jewish people being restricted from working, and they received less ration stamps, so they were getting pretty hungry. And things just continued to get worse. Rosa's mother had retained her English citizenship, and people approached her and asked her to write them, first to teach them English, and then, just in case they got to emigrate from Germany. And then they started asking her to write letters for them, because in order to get out of the country, you had to have a sponsor. So they would ask her to write letters to people to sponsor them so they can get out of the country. So some of them managed to make it out of the country, but a lot of them were forced to stay. Kristallnacht came, which is the night of broken glass. Mm-hmm. A German embassy official had been this guy's parents got forced out of Germany, and then he assassinated a German embassy worker. And then the Germans did not like that, so they were riot. And she describes it as the Nazis were so angry and the Jewish people were terrified. Later on, the Nazis entered the village in trucks, storming homes of Jewish people, stealing and destroying all of their stuff. They used axes to break down doors and windows, and many of the Jewish men and boys were taken away and never seen again. A lady fled through her back door with her son, and they hid in this was as Nazis were breaking into her house.
Yeah.
She fled out the back door, and they hid in the brush for all night, and she ended up contracting pneumonia and dying.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So later on, the rest of the Jews were rounded up and put on a train and taken away. But just before leaving, when they closed the doors, and just before leaving, the Nazi guards took all of their possessions off of the train and just left them on the ground and left. So after getting a job and starting to earn money, Rosa bought her mother a radio. And of course, in Germany at the time, it wasn't illegal to own a radio, but it was illegal to listen to other countries' broadcasts. And despite this, Rosa's mother would listen to the BBC broadcast and report back to any remaining Jewish citizens in their town. So one day, the lawyer, he's coming back in.
Yep.
Rosa was working with him, and he was acting really strange. He was dictating this letter to her, but he wasn't mentioning any names, and she thought that was really weird, so she got really suspicious. And once they left the office and he got on his train, she went back and she looked at this letter he was reading, and it stated that somebody had accused a woman of she was giving food to like the Jewish people because they're starving at this point, and accused her mother of listening to broadcasts and like reporting back on it, which at this point was true. So she took the train back to her hometown, and at first she knocked on the lady who was accused of feeding the Jews, and who said she said she didn't know anything about it. And then she went to the butcher's house, because like I guess he's like a well-known he's a well-known guy. And he asked him about it, and he denied knowing anything, but finally confessed that he heard the police chief say they should just leave that old lady alone. And then, so because of that, she went to the police station. The police chief is very anti-Nazi, by the way. Hates the Nazis. He also denied knowing anything, but soon admitted that he knew Rosa's mother had been reported, and so the butcher was part of like and they had this little circle going on.
Yeah.
And he had a son in the Gestapo, which is the Hitler's like secret police that just watched everything. And so the butcher promised his nephew all the meat they needed to get their family by during the war, and he would pass down his sons close to the family, and in order to make this letter disappear, and it did, like it vanished. The war went on, and life became more difficult in Germany, and so everything was rationed, and Rosa would help the mayor like separate these rations out for different families. So everybody in Germany, including like the Christians who weren't being persecuted at all, were like feared the Nazis. So any disagreement against them was punishable by death. And many foreigners were forced to work on farms, and so they would work, like I think this was like prisoner of wars. They would work for the farmers, and they would eat with the farmers, and then at night they would go and they would sleep in camps.
Yeah.
Many were English and French prisoners of war. Some Polish citizens were also forced to work on the farms, and then in one case, a Polish worker got into an argument with the farmer and threatened him with a pitchfork, and he was lynched in the middle of town. The lawyer. Well, he's here once again. The lawyer that Rosa worked for was forced to he had to watch it because he's a lawyer, he's a police guy. And she said he came, he returned to the office like pale and sick to his stomach. So people, despite being afraid of the Nazis, people were still like doing like brave stuff.
Yeah.
A woman that worked for the post office would receive packages in mail for Jewish citizens, and she would smear off the return addresses so nobody would get in trouble, and then she would pass them along and they would get to the houses. As the war continued, they began bombing places, but their village was never bombed, but the village 2 miles away was destroyed in a bombing. Rosa remembers looking up at the sky and seeing the bombs. She watched as bomb doors opened and they just fell. Many bridges were destroyed by the Germans destroyed these bridges as they retreated from the Allied forces. On Easter Sunday in 1945, the German troops left the village. At this point they had ransacked homes. They were living in these people's houses, but they left and the Americans came in, and the night before, Rosa's family and 20 other people had taken refuge in this farmer's cellar, and he came and he knocked on the door and he was like, the Americans are here. So Rosa could speak English, so the farmer's wife wanted to know if the Americans needed anything, so she went up to this huge tank, and the lid opened, and this American officer gets out and puts a gun at her, and she said, she asked him if he needed anything, and he didn't quite understand, but she was like, the farmer's wife wants to know if you need anything, and he was like, we'd like some fresh eggs. So she brought them the fresh eggs, and they took them down into the tank, and she explained to them that the farmer's wife would like her basket back. And so he was like, okay, whatever. He brought the basket back up, but in the basket was like a bunch of chocolate. Like they had pit bars of chocolate in there, which is something they had not seen since the war began. So those soldiers left, and they were replaced by other soldiers who took up residence in the village, which they took a lot of like furniture from people because I guess they need furniture. I don't know. They're in houses.
Because why not?
So soon after the Americans arrived, a lieutenant approached Rosa because she could speak English, and he said he had a job for her and that she would report like on Monday, like the next day, for her job. And so the Americans had set up this headquarters in like the lower level of a bank, and her first assignment was to accompany Freddie, a soldier, Freddie, nice man, to find office furniture for the headquarters. She describes him as a small, worry man, always chewing gum. So she, like, I didn't write this down, but like she went to this place where she knew they stored office furniture, and this lady was like, no, send them somewhere else. I want to keep this.
Yeah.
But they took it anyways. So a rumor spread through town that the Americans would be leaving and they would be replaced by Russian soldiers, and people became scared because they had heard of the brutality that the Russian soldiers had against the Americans. And Rosa cried in front of like an American soldier who comforted her and promised to take her with if the Russians came. But she had her mother there, so even if he did keep his promise, she couldn't leave her. She says like the Americans weren't what they expected. They were kind of rude, and they weren't very formal. Unlike their traditional lifestyle, they were very polite. They were very formal. Later, after the war, Rosa married an American officer and left to America with him in 1948. He had been previously stationed in Germany. They settled in Battle Creek, Michigan for a short period of time, and then they moved as her husband was transferred from like post to post. So, any thoughts?
Well, I just think like they were kind of being a little harsh on the Americans. The Americans just got done fighting a war.
They weren't even done fighting a war. The war was still going on.
That's my point. I would be a little pissed off too.
Well, I mean, they were starving. They were being treated unfairly by these Germans, and they were like Germany, and they were still polite to the Americans. But the Americans had no respect for them, and they just took their stuff.
Yeah, I guess you're right. All right, well, thanks for watching. Tune in next week, and we will be talking about
Irene Safran.
Irene Safran.
It's a long one, like even longer than this one was.
Like and subscribe.